Imposter syndrome. What is it? Why is it a problem? And how do we develop the psychological skills to overcome it? Well, I'm going to try and answer all of those questions in today's video. So if this is something you struggle with in life, you're going to want to stick around. Here's a definition for you. Unpleasant feelings of insufficiency in what you do that persist despite evident success. It is a psychological phenomenon where we develop skills out in the world but do not align our identity or our self-concept with what we are capable of. And as a consequence, who we think we are and what we think we can do are not in sync, and we feel like an imposter. And this is baked into the nature of our minds, right? Because the brain is not wired to make us happy. The brain is wired to help our ancestors survive thousands of years ago, and always tilting to believe that you just aren't quite good enough or just aren't quite as prepared for a situation as you could be helped those ancestors stay alive. But because this feeling is such a deep feature of our psychology, it is a phenomenon experienced by people from all walks of life. David Bowie, for example, said, "I had enormous self-image problems and very low self-esteem, which I hid behind obsessive writing and performing. I really felt so utterly inadequate." And Emma Watson said, "When I receive recognition for my acting, I feel incredibly uncomfortable. I tend to turn in on myself." So if it's a natural thing, right, that people even on the top of their game feel, then why is it such a problem? Well, the answer is it's not. But it sort of is. It's complicated, right? Let me explain. I want you to imagine that you're about to play some kind of game. Let's pick something random like, I don't know, table tennis, right? And when you arrive to play this game of table tennis, you realize that your opponent is a 10-year-old. And at that point, you're now pretty certain, right, that you're going to win. And unless you are some kind of psychopath or sociopath, you'll realize that playing against a 10-year-old no longer makes the game even really feel worth playing. And that's because playing a game against someone you pretty much know you're going to win is largely pointless. But what's interesting for this video, right, is that the risk that you might lose because you are potentially too insufficient is what makes playing a game engaging. Now imagine in a different context that you want to learn something like a musical instrument, right? If you only stuck to learning the basics, like primary 4-chord songs, right? And you never pushed yourself to learn something that you're currently not capable of doing and that you currently feel too insufficient to do, well, you would eventually get so bored that you want to smash the thing up. And that's because the feeling of struggle, right? Recognizing that you're insufficient when you're trying to master something difficult but valuable is what makes the process incredibly engaging. Now, going back to imposter syndrome, I don't think it's necessarily a problem because I don't think that feeling that you're out of your depth in a lot of cases is a bad sign. I think actually it can be a good sign. A sign that you're growing, a sign that you are exploring new territory in what you're capable of. Psychoanalyst Carl Jung said that the fool is the precursor to the savior. And what I think he meant by that was, you first have to be a fraud, you have to be an imposter before you can be someone remarkable. It is a necessary prerequisite. And when you actually think about it in mundane, everyday terms, when you start something, you are shit, right? You are a fool because you're putting time and effort into something you are shit at, right? But that is a necessary first stage for you to improve and become good at that thing. And over time, the fool becomes the savior as you go from being shit to being good at something through practicing it over time. But the important idea is this, right? You have to be willing to feel insufficient in order to transform yourself. You have to be willing to be seen as a fool, to be laughed at, to be mocked, to be ridiculed, to eventually be seen as a kind of hero. For me, in a basketball sporting context, right, when I've got the ball in a position to shoot, I have to be willing to shoot and miss and fail and look like a fool in order to have the chance to score. So going back to our original definition of imposter syndrome, the problem to me is not the feelings of insufficiency. The problem comes in the last 5 words. That persist despite evident success. The problem comes from initially being the stupidest person in the room, improving so that that is no longer the case, but still believing that you don't deserve to be in that room. The problem then is not any feelings of insufficiency. The problem is inaccuracy in self-assessment where you don't know how good you actually are. Because not only does that make you feel not very good or not good enough in different scenarios, it also stops you from growing at the point when you're no longer an imposter and you need to move on to try different things and expand what you're capable of. We have to learn to accurately recognize our level of competence, but most importantly, align our identity to that. Put bluntly, if you're an imposter, you should feel like one, right? But if you're not, you need to notice that and decide what should be done about it. So here are 2 ideas to help you develop accurate self-assessment so you know how good you actually are and can be confident in that, but also acknowledge where you need to improve. Use proof that can't be debated, right? Because the best way to convince your brain that you're good at something is to provide it proof that that is the case. Go out in the world and take action. Do the thing. Alex Hormozy has this great quote that I've talked about in videos before where he said, "Confidence isn't built by shouting affirmations in the mirror, but through building an undeniable stack of proof that you are who you say you are." This proof can be outcomes that you specifically aim for, but those aren't always as reliable and aren't always fully in our control. So sometimes a good measure to focus on is the hours of effort that you've put into your craft, the time under tension, and the consistency that you've practiced over time. Or you can use certain objective measures completely in your control to track your improvement, right? How many paintings have you finished recently? How much more weight can you lift this month compared to last month? How many videos have you made? How many pages of your book have you written, right? Whatever question is right for you. And the answer to those questions builds a level of proof that you are good that cannot be debated by anyone, including the imposter voice in your head. Secondly, you can go meta on yourself. Now let me explain what that means. Human beings like me and you have a huge part of our brain just under our forehead called the prefrontal cortex. And many of the wonderful, specifically human things that the prefrontal cortex does for us is allow us to go meta on ourselves, i.e. detach from our lives and see ourselves from a kind of third-person perspective. With conscious effort, we can view ourselves from a kind of perspective of someone we know, and this allows us to get some insight, right, into how we're doing in life beyond our own personal feelings of insufficiency. Part of this involves treating yourself like someone who has and can improve at things in life, and a lot of that, right, that fundamental self-belief comes from accruing the undebatable proof that I mentioned earlier. Essentially, the psychological skill we need to develop to overcome imposter syndrome, in inverted commas, right, is to know when it's right to feel like a fraud and when it's not. We don't want to get rid of these feelings of insufficiency, but we do want to be able to discriminate between when it's right to feel confident in our own abilities and when it's right to shut up and be the student and listen to those around us who know more. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't seen me before, my name is Joel. I make videos on psychology and personal development. And if you want to continue your journey exploring my content, then why not watch this next video here? Because I think it was pretty decent. So I'll see you over there.